It was a quiet evening, the kind of evening when a person just wants to sit down and rest after a long day. He had returned from work tired, his head heavy, and all he wanted was a simple meal and a few minutes of silence. Nothing special had happened that day. It was a normal routine, a normal shift, a normal walk home. He placed his bag on the table, loosened his shoes, and finally took a deep breath. For the first time all day, he felt a bit of peace. He was just about to heat his food when his phone buzzed on the counter. At first, he didn't pay attention. Most of the time, it was random messages or promotional texts. But then it rang again, this time continuously. When he looked at the screen, he saw an unknown number calling him. He hesitated. Normally, he didn't answer unknown calls. But something in him felt like maybe it was important. Maybe work needed something. Or someone from the neighborhood was calling. So he picked it up. A man on the other end introduced himself as someone from a delivery company. He said there was a package registered under his full name. It's delivered earlier in the day, but since he had not been home, it had been redirected to a holding center. He frowned. He hadn't ordered anything. He hadn't even browsed shopping sites lately. He tried to explain politely that he never placed any order. But the caller spoke so confidently, repeating every detail of his address and his name, that it made him pause. How could a stranger know that much? The caller told him the package had some unusual details on the shipping label, so the company needed him to confirm his identity before they could release it. The way the man talked sounded formal, almost official, not rude, but very firm. He felt uneasy. Something didn't add up, but the man didn't sound suspicious. So he answered a few harmless questions, like confirming his address and whether he was expecting anything from another city. Every answer he gave led to more questions from the caller. The conversation felt longer than it should be. After a few minutes, the caller said they would forward his information to the security office of the company for further confirmation. He ended the call politely, promising someone would reach out soon. The moment the call ended, the quiet of the room returned. But this time, it didn't feel peaceful. He stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of it. What kind of package? Who would send him anything? Why did they need to verify him? The doubt circled in his mind. He tried to brush it off and continued heating his food. He ate slowly, distracted by the conversation replaying in his head. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone used his name by accident. Things like that happen sometimes, he told himself. Later that night, after he was done cleaning and finally resting in bed, his phone rang again. This time, the number was different. A new, unknown number, he answered, thinking it might be the delivery company again. But the person on the line didn't introduce himself the same way. Instead, he spoke in a sharp, serious voice. He claimed to be calling from a local police station. The caller said the package in his name was now part of an investigation. He needed to cooperate immediately, or it would be considered suspicious behavior. Hearing the word investigation made his stomach tighten. He sat up straight on his bed. He tried to explain again that he had not ordered anything and did not know about any package. But the caller didn't sound patient. Instead, he warned him that failing to confirm certain details could lead to further action, the man said. If you do not cooperate, we may have to send officers to your home. This is a legal matter. The words hit him hard. Police legal matter? Officers coming to his house? He felt his heartbeat speed up. His room, which felt safe a moment ago, suddenly felt too small. He tried staying calm, asking the caller if there was any mistake. But the caller kept repeating that the case was serious. The tone was strict, almost threatening. He had never dealt with anything involving police before. He always followed rules, kept to himself, and lived a simple life. Even the idea of getting a traffic ticket used to scare him a little. So hearing someone speak like this made him anxious. The caller asked him to confirm personal details to verify his innocence. That phrase alone made him feel trapped. Why did he need to prove he was innocent if he hadn't done anything wrong? He wanted to hang up. Something inside him whispered that this felt wrong. But fear is a strong force, and at that moment, fear was all he felt. The caller ended by saying, "We will contact you again soon. Do not ignore it." After the call ended, he just sat there in silence. He didn't move for a while. He could feel his chest tighten and his hands shake. He looked around his room, his small, safe space, and for the first time, he didn't feel safe. He didn't sleep much that night. He kept checking his phone, worried it might ring again. Every notification made him jump. He kept imagining officers knocking on his door, people from the neighborhood watching, his workplace finding out. His mind created scenarios he never thought about before. When morning came, he felt exhausted. He went through his routine, but everything felt heavier. At work, he kept losing focus. Every time his phone buzzed, he felt a sharp pull of anxiety in his stomach. He tried telling himself it was probably a mistake. But the tone of the man's voice kept replaying in his head firm. Serious, accusing. By the afternoon, he was so stressed that he barely noticed time passing. When he finally returned home, he expected everything to be normal. But the fear came back as soon as he unlocked his door. Later that evening, the phone rang again. Same unknown number. His hands trembled as he answered. The caller started speaking immediately, now reminding him that they had warned him earlier about the seriousness of the situation. The man sounded irritated, like someone who had been waiting for him to take it seriously. He repeated that the package could be linked to an illegal case, and they needed him to verify certain information. He tried telling the caller again that he had done nothing wrong and didn't know where the package came from. But the man didn't soften. Instead, he raised his voice slightly, saying that cooperating would make things easier for everyone. That line terrified him. He felt cornered. The man asked for details he wasn't comfortable sharing, like his identification number and employment status. He paused for a long moment, unsure what to say. His heart felt like it was pounding in his ears. The caller said, "If you are innocent, you should not hesitate." It felt like pressure sitting on his chest. He spoke carefully, saying he needed time to think, but the caller didn't like that. The man warned him that delaying could be seen as avoiding investigation. After the call ended, he was left shaking again. He had never felt so helpless. He walked around his room, trying to calm himself, but nothing helped. He kept imagining officers showing up at his door, people questioning him, losing his job, getting into trouble for something he didn't even do. The next morning, he looked tired and pale. He didn't feel like going to work, but he had no choice. Throughout the day, he couldn't concentrate. Every vibration from his phone made him jump. He kept thinking, why is this happening to me? What did I do wrong? But he had no answer. By the time he returned home again, he was emotionally drained. He sat on his bed for a long time, trying to regain control of his thoughts. His mind kept circling the same fears. He didn't want trouble. He didn't want anyone knocking on his door. He didn't want anything that could ruin his peace. He didn't realize how much the calls were affecting him until he found himself unable to eat properly. His hands trembled so much he could barely hold a spoon. His thoughts kept racing. His chest felt tight every time he thought of the next call. He didn't tell anyone. He felt embarrassed and scared. What if people thought he really was involved in something illegal? So he kept it all inside. That night, he didn't sleep again. He kept checking his phone, worried he might miss a call and make the situation worse, even though he tried convincing himself it was probably nothing. The fear was too strong. It felt like a shadow following him everywhere, no matter what he did, and deep inside. He sensed something was wrong, but he didn't know, yet that the truth was far different from what he feared. The next morning arrived with a heaviness he carried in his chest. He had barely slept, and even though he tried to shake off the tension, the fear stayed with him like a shadow. Every little sound made him turn his head. Every vibration from his phone made his heart jump. The calm routine he once had was slowly slipping away. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the phone on the table. It felt like a strange, dangerous object, now something that could change his life at any second. He tried telling himself it was just confusion, a misunderstanding, maybe even a mistake by someone in a far-off office. But the voice he heard the night before, the strict tone, the threat of officers coming to his house, that part refused to leave his mind before leaving for work. He picked up his phone and considered blocking the number. His thumb hovered over the option, but fear stopped him. What if it really was serious? What if ignoring the call made it worse? What if they actually sent someone to his home? He sighed and put the phone in his pocket, wishing he could switch off his thoughts the same way. At work, he forced himself to focus, but it was almost impossible. Every few minutes, he found himself replaying the conversations in his head. His coworkers laughed, chatted, moved around like any other day, but he felt disconnected. Like he was watching everything from behind a glass wall. He kept checking his phone even though it was completely silent. When his shift ended, he walked home slower than usual. He didn't feel ready to face whatever was waiting on the other end of the next call. The street looked the same as it always did, but to him it felt different. He felt exposed, uneasy, as if something might happen at any moment. The moment he stepped inside his apartment, his phone rang. The sudden sound hit him like a shock. He froze for a second before gathering the courage to answer. The caller was the same man, who claimed to be from the police station. His tone was already annoyed, as if he had been waiting the whole day. He asked why the young man had not called back earlier, saying the delay was irresponsible. The fear returned instantly. He tried to explain that he had been at work, but the caller didn't seem interested. Instead, he pressed harder. The man said, "We have already told you this is a serious matter. If you don't cooperate fully, it may not end well for you." Those words sent a cold wave across his body. He felt the pressure tightening around him like an invisible rope. The caller then began asking for more personal details. This time, the questions were more direct. He wanted his identification number, his workplace address, and even information about his bank account. The young man hesitated. Something inside him screamed that this wasn't right, but the fear kept pushing him toward agreeing. He felt his breath become shallow. His hands trembled. The caller noticed his hesitation and raised his voice. Saying that avoiding these questions would make him look guilty, he whispered, "I'm not guilty of anything." But the man replied firmly, "Then prove it. Otherwise, you leave us no choice." His mind raced. He tried to think clearly, but the fear was louder than reason. He didn't want trouble with the police. He didn't want strangers knocking on his door. He didn't want to be seen as someone hiding something. He asked for some time to check things and understand the situation better. The caller didn't like that. He said this type of request would be reported as non-cooperation. The call lasted long, longer than he even realized. When it finally ended, he felt drained, as if all the energy had been pulled out of him. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know who to ask for help. He didn't know who he could trust. He paced around his room for a while, feeling lost. His thoughts were messy and sharp, cutting into his peace. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw officers at his door. Every time he tried to calm himself, he remembered the voice warning him. The anxiety began affecting him more than he expected. He couldn't eat dinner. He couldn't sit still. He kept grabbing his phone and checking it, even when there was no notification. As the evening went on, the phone rang again. He answered quickly, afraid that ignoring it would make things worse. This time, the caller sounded different. The voice was colder, almost frustrated. The man said they had checked the details on the package and found serious issues in the shipping label. He said it could be connected to illegal activities. Hearing those words made the young man's body tense. His heart dropped. He felt like the ground under him wasn't stable anymore. He tried to explain everything again. The caller didn't seem to care. He kept insisting that the young man needed to prove he had nothing to do with the shipment. And for that, they needed sensitive details. When he didn't answer fast enough, the caller said, "If you don't help us now, it may go further. Officers can reach your address anytime. We don't want to cause you trouble, but you're leaving us no choice." His breathing became shaky. His palms were sweating. He looked around his room like he was expecting someone to knock on the door at any moment. He felt like he was losing control of his own life. That night, fear kept him awake. His mind didn't rest for even a minute. Every sound outside made him jump. Every car that passed made him think someone had come for him. He kept sitting up and checking the door, the windows, the phone. In the middle of the night, the phone rang again. The caller ordered him to stay available until they finished verification. He was told not to disconnect without permission. so he sat in the dim light of his room, clutching the phone, listening to the voice that kept repeating instructions. Hours went by like that. His eyes were tired, his body felt weak, but he didn't dare disconnect. He didn't know what consequences might follow. When the call finally ended, he felt hollow. He put the phone down and covered his face with his hands. He didn't understand why this was happening to him. He didn't understand what he could do to make it stop. He turned off the lights and tried lying down, but his mind was too loud. He stayed awake till early morning, thinking, worrying, and imagining the worst. When he finally got up the next day, he looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the tired face staring back at him. His eyes were red, his expression stressed. He felt like he had aged years overnight. All day he couldn't focus. He had to remind himself to breathe. Even the smallest sound startled him. People around him talked normally, but he heard nothing clearly. Everything felt distant. When he got home, he didn't even bother turning on the lights right away. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. His phone lay beside him, silent but threatening. He didn't know when it would ring again, but he knew it would. He thought about telling someone. But then he worried, what if the callers were right? What if talking about it made things worse? What if someone misunderstood and believed he was involved in something illegal? The thought scared him even more. He held his head in his hands. The pressure felt too much. His thoughts spun like a storm. He felt trapped in a situation he didn't create, didn't understand, didn't know how to escape. Later that evening, the phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a call. It was a message. The message said they were reviewing his case, and he needed to stay prepared for the next step. The wording was strict and cold. It made his heart sink. The fear that had started as a small knot in his chest had now grown into something heavy. Something that sat inside him and refused to leave. He kept imagining consequences, imagining officers knocking, imagining his name being dragged into something serious. Every part of his mind was filled with fear. That night he couldn't even try to sleep. He just sat there, staring at the phone screen, waiting for the next call that could change everything. He had no idea that the truth behind all this was far from what he feared, and that the fear he felt was leading him deeper into a trap he didn't yet understand. The next day felt even heavier than the ones before. He woke up with a tightness in his chest and a dull ache behind his eyes. The lack of sleep, the constant fear, and the pressure from the calls had drained him. He moved slowly, almost like he was carrying weight on his shoulders that no one else could see. Even brushing his teeth felt like a task he had to push himself through. He checked his phone the moment he opened his eyes. No missed calls, no messages. But instead of feeling relief, he felt a strange discomfort. The silence felt dangerous, like the calm before a storm. He couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. Throughout the morning, he kept replaying everything in his head. He tried to think of any possible explanation for the package. He tried to remember if he had ever shared his address with anyone who could have done something strange, but nothing made sense. His life was simple. He didn't have enemies. He didn't take risks. He went to work, came home, and lived quietly. That was it. But the calls had turned his simple life upside down. He left for work, but his mind wasn't present. He barely listened to the noise around him, the cars, the people, the footsteps. Everything felt distant. His own steps didn't even sound like they belonged to him. His thoughts were louder than anything outside. At work, he tried to focus, but his attention kept breaking. He made small mistakes he normally never made. His coworkers noticed something was off, but he forced smiles and short answers, pretending he was fine. He didn't want anyone asking questions. He didn't want anyone knowing what was happening, but deep inside, felt like he was breaking. After lunch, he received a text message that made his stomach twist. It was from another unknown number, telling him that his case review had reached a sensitive stage and that he must be available for a call later in the evening. The message said he should not talk to anyone about it and that everything must stay confidential. His hands shook as he read it. The message felt colder than the calls, more controlled, more calculated. He swallowed hard and put the phone back in his pocket. but the fear stayed stuck inside his throat. When his workday ended, he didn't go straight home. He walked slowly, stopping at random corners, pretending to check his phone, even though he already knew what it said. He didn't want to reach home because he didn't want to face the next call. But eventually, he had no choice. When he got inside, he didn't turn on the lights. He just sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor, waiting for the phone to ring, and it did. His heart started pounding immediately. He picked up the phone with shaky hands. The voice on the other end was the same, cold and stern. The caller said the situation had escalated. They needed him to take part in a verification process to check his involvement and confirm he wasn't avoiding the investigation. The voice sounded impatient, as if everything happening was his fault. He tried to speak, but his throat felt dry. He said he had no idea what was happening, that he didn't know anything about the package. But the caller didn't slow down. Instead, he became more forceful. He told the young man to stay on the call, no matter how long it took. He said disconnecting would be seen as an attempt to flee responsibility. Those words hit him like a blow. He agreed quietly, not knowing what else to do. The caller then asked him to join a video call for identity confirmation. The very idea terrified him. He had never been comfortable with video calls, even with people he knew. The thought of showing his face to someone threatening him made his skin crawl. He hesitated.
Ow.
But the caller pushed him again, saying refusal would be noted. He swallowed hard and agreed. When the video call started, he could barely lift the phone. He felt nervous, shaking. The caller's camera was off, of course. Only his voice came through. The man told him to hold up his ID card, to show his face clearly, to move slowly so the verification team could record everything. He did as told, even though his hands were trembling. He felt vulnerable, exposed, like someone was watching him too closely. The call went on for a long time. The caller kept repeating instructions, asking the same questions again and again, making him feel like he was being tested. The tone of the voice was controlling, almost cruel at one point. The caller asked him to stay seated and not leave the room until further notice. He didn't argue. He just nodded silently. Hours passed like that. He didn't even realize when night fully settled outside. He didn't notice the hunger in his stomach or the pain in his back from sitting too long. His whole mind was consumed by fear of doing something wrong, fear of making the caller angry, fear of being blamed for something he didn't do. When the call finally ended, he felt like he had run a marathon. His body felt drained, his mind numb. He put the phone down and leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes. He could feel his heartbeat still racing, but the silence after the call didn't feel peaceful. It felt like another form of pressure. He didn't know if they would call again. He didn't know if officers would show up in the middle of the night. He didn't know if he had made things worse. He lay down, but couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying the caller's voice, cold, demanding, accusing. He couldn't erase it. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt like someone was watching him. By early morning, he was so exhausted that he felt numb. He got up slowly, moved like a person who hadn't rested in days. He looked at his reflection in the mirror. The tired face staring back at him didn't feel like his own. He stepped outside his apartment to get some fresh air. The hallway was quiet. The outside world looked normal at the sky, the distant sound of cars, the breeze. But he didn't feel normal inside. He walked aimlessly for a while, trying to breathe, trying to calm himself. But everywhere he went, the fear followed him. When he returned home, he sat down and stared at his phone again. The silence felt threatening. He didn't want another call. He also feared what might happen if they felt he wasn't responding. Hours passed before the next call came. When it did, his stomach dropped. This time, the caller sounded frustrated. He said the young man had not been cooperating enough. He said there were serious doubts about his innocence. He talked in circles, making the young man feel smaller with every sentence. The pressure built inside him like a rising wave. He tried explaining again, but the caller didn't listen. Instead, he began demanding things that made him uncomfortable. He wanted more ID details, more explanations, some more personal information. It was too much for the first time. The young man felt something inside him snap, not in anger, but in helplessness. He felt like crying, but the fear stopped the tears. He sat quietly, barely speaking, barely breathing. The caller kept talking, pushing, pressing. The young man felt like a rope being pulled from both ends, close to tearing apart, eventually after almost an hour. The caller ended the call with a warning that they would evaluate his cooperation, follow up soon. When the line disconnected, the young man dropped the phone on the bed and covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook, though he didn't make a sound. He wasn't even sure if he was crying or just shaking from stress. For the first time since this all began, he realized he couldn't keep going like this. He was losing sleep, losing focus, losing peace. He felt alone in something too big for him. He needed help, but the fear still held him back. The callers had told him not to talk to anyone, not to share anything, and he believed them. His mind was tangled between fear and confusion. He sat there, breathing heavily, trying to think clearly, but all he felt was fear. After a long time, he picked up his phone again. He scrolled through the contacts. His finger stopped on one name, a close friend, someone he trusted deeply. He stared at the name for a long time, debating, hesitating. Finally, with trembling hands and a heart beating too fast, he pressed call. The moment his friend answered and said hello, something inside him cracked. His voice shook as he said, "I need to tell you something. I don't know what to do anymore." The next morning began with a strange quiet that hung in the air like unspoken words. He woke up early, long before the sun properly rose, because sleep would not come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the people who had yelled at him, the threat of the police, and the pressure that had made him feel small and helpless only a day earlier. Even though he knew he had done nothing wrong, the weight of the situation stayed with him. He moved around the kitchen slowly, making tea just to keep his hands busy. The house felt different now, as if the tension from the previous day had left a mark on the walls. He kept replaying every detail in his mind, trying to understand what had gone wrong. He was the kind of person who always believed problems could be solved by talking, by staying calm, by being honest. But the way things had unfolded was nothing like what he expected. After a long moment of silence, he sat down with his tea and stared out the window. People passing by on the street seemed normal and relaxed. They didn't know anything about what had happened. They didn't know how a simple misunderstanding had turned into a threat that could change everything. He kept reminding himself that he had nothing to hide. That alone should have made him feel safe. But the truth was, when someone threatens you with police, even when you know you are innocent, a part of you still feels fear. A part of you still worries about what could happen if things go wrong. He tried to clear his thoughts, focus on what needed to be done. He had decided last night that he would not let the situation hang over him. He needed to show them the truth. He needed to explain things clearly, even if they had treated him unfairly. But he also knew he had to be careful. People who jump to conclusions easily often refuse to listen. He had to prepare himself mentally. He had to remain calm, even if they were not. After finishing his tea, he took a deep breath and gathered all the documents and small pieces of proof he had collected the previous night. He placed everything neatly in a file. These papers were not extraordinary, but they were enough to show the truth. Enough to show that their accusations were baseless. While getting ready to leave, he felt a mix of anxiety and determination. It wasn't easy to face people who had shouted at him and threatened him without thinking. But he knew he had to. If he ran away or stayed silent, it would look like he had something to hide. On his way out, he locked the door behind him and walked slowly towards the place where everything had happened. The streets were brighter now, with the sun rising and people heading to work. Some were carrying bags, some were rushing, some walking calmly. Seeing them made him feel a little better. It reminded him that every day moves forward no matter what. As he approached the building, his heart began to beat faster. He wasn't scared, but the memory of yesterday still made him tense. He paused near the entrance and took a deep breath before stepping inside. When he reached the main room where they usually gathered, he saw a few people already there. They were talking among themselves, but the moment they noticed him, the room fell silent. Their expressions shifted. Some looked unsure, some looked uncomfortable, and a few still looked annoyed. He walked in calmly and placed the file on the table. For a moment, no one said a word. He waited, letting the silence settle. Finally, one of them, the same person who had shouted the most yesterday, spoke first. "So, what do you want now?" the person asked in a cold tone. He stayed calm and replied softly, "I came because I want you to know the truth. Yesterday, things were said in anger, and you threatened me with police. I want to clear this today." They looked at each other, and one of them crossed their arms as if ready for an argument. But he did not argue. Instead, he opened the file. "Everything you accused me of. Here is the proof that none of it is true," he said. He began to explain, step by step, showing each document and the reason behind it. He spoke slowly, not to show weakness, but to make sure every word was understood. He didn't raise his voice, didn't act defensive, didn't blame anyone. He just explained. As he went on, the expressions in the room started to change. Some of them leaned forward, looking more carefully. Some whispered quietly to each other. The tension slowly dropped, replaced by confusion and realization. After he finished speaking, there was another moment of silence. They looked at the papers, then at him, then back at each other. The main person who had shouted yesterday looked uncomfortable now.
Wait, the person said, frowning.
"So you're telling us you didn't do anything wrong?" He nodded gently. "Yes, and if you had asked me calmly yesterday, I would have told you the same thing." Someone else stepped closer and picked up one of the papers. The person scanned it quickly and sighed. This changes everything." The tone had softened now. The room grew heavy with embarrassment. They realized how quickly they had turned against him without checking the facts. They had allowed assumptions to become accusations. "Why didn't you bring this yesterday?" another person asked. He looked at them calmly. "You didn't give me a chance. You didn't ask. You shouted and said you would call the police. You didn't want to hear me?" The truth in his words made some of them drop their eyes. He wasn't saying it to insult them. He didn't want to make them feel guilty. He just wanted them to understand. A few seconds later, someone finally said, We may have reacted too fast." Another person nodded. "Yes, maybe we should have asked first." There was still tension in the room, but it was no longer anger or fear. It was regret. He stood there quietly, letting them process everything. He didn't need them to apologize. What he wanted most was to clear his name and walk away without bitterness. But what happened next surprised him. The person who had shouted the loudest. Yesterday, the same one who had threatened him with the police took a deep breath and said, "I think I owe you an apology. I shouldn't have threatened you." We all jumped to conclusions. The apology sounded awkward and forced, but it was honest. He nodded gently. "I accept your apology. I just want peace," another person added. "We should handle things better in the future." Even though the atmosphere was calmer now, he could still feel the after effects of yesterday. Trust, once shaken, doesn't come back right away. But he wasn't upset. He understood that people make mistakes when they are stressed or scared. He gathered his papers and placed them back in the file. He didn't rush. He wanted the moment to settle. When he finally stepped out of the room, he felt an unexpected lightness in his chest. The air outside felt fresh, like he had been holding his breath for too long. He looked up at the sky and felt grateful that the truth had finally come out. On his way back home, he walked slowly, thinking about everything that had happened. The world looked different now. He realized that misunderstandings can turn into storms when people stop listening. And sometimes all it takes to calm the storm is patience and truth. But deep inside, he also felt something else, small, quiet strength. He had faced something unfair, something frightening, yet he did not lose control or react in anger. He stood his ground with dignity. He reached home, unlocked the door, and entered quietly. The teacup from the morning was still on the table. He placed the file down beside it and sat for a long moment. He knew the story was not over yet. Even though the truth was out, there were still things he needed to deal with. He needed to rebuild trust, restore peace, and find closure. Part of him wished everything could go back to normal quickly, but he understood that healing takes time. Still, he felt hopeful. For the first time since the trouble began, he felt that things were slowly moving in the right direction. And he knew that the next part of the story would bring even more clarity and maybe even some unexpected turns that would change everything again the day after. Everything was cleared. He woke up feeling lighter, but not completely free from the weight of what had happened. The truth was out, yes, and the people who accused him had realized their mistake. But the emotional pressure they had put him through did not disappear overnight. He was still carrying the memory of being threatened, of facing a room full of angry faces, and of feeling alone while standing up for himself. He took his time getting out of bed, breathing slowly, letting his thoughts settle. It was a new day, and he wanted to enter it calmly. The sunlight coming through the window felt softer than usual, like a quiet reminder that things had changed. Even if yesterday had been heavy, today could still be something better. After washing up, he made tea again, just like he always did. But this time, his hands did not shake. His mind was clearer. He sat by the window with his cup and watched the street wake up. People walked by as if the world had never seen trouble. Kids were laughing. A street vendor pushed his cart, preparing for the day. Life moved on, and he wanted to move with it. He thought about what he needed to do next. Clearing his name was one thing, but there were feelings he needed to settle within himself, feelings of fear, disappointment, and confusion. The situation had changed him, not in a dramatic way, but in a deeper, quieter way that only he could feel. He knew he had to go back to the people who had accused him, not to confront them again, but to continue rebuilding the understanding that had almost been broken completely. This wasn't something he wanted to rush, but he also didn't want to run from it. He finished his tea, packed the same file he had shown them yesterday, and stepped out of the house. The walk felt different today. The fear was gone. The worry had softened. What remained was a calm strength, the kind that comes from surviving a moment you never wanted to face. When he reached the building, he paused for a second, looking at the entrance. It looked normal, but yesterday this same entrance had felt like the doorway to something frightening. Today, it simply looked like a place that held unfinished conversations. He took a breath and walked in. Inside, a few people were already gathered. This time their expressions were less tense. Some looked awkward, unsure how to behave after what had happened. Others offered small nods, as if silently acknowledging the truth that had come out. He walked over to the table, not with the heaviness of yesterday, but with quiet confidence. One of them approached him first. "Hey, ... the person said, voice soft, almost careful. "You came back," he nodded. "Yes. I thought it would be good to talk a little more." Yesterday ended quickly. Exchanged a look, the kind that carries both regret and relief. Another person stepped forward. "We didn't sleep well last night," the person admitted. "We kept thinking about how fast we reacted." A third person added quietly, "And how wrongly." He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just listened. He wasn't there for apologies, but he appreciated that they were trying. One of them motioned toward a chair. "Please, sit." He did, and they sat across from him. "We want to understand everything fully," someone said. "Not because we don't trust you, but because we want to fix the misunderstanding. We want to avoid this kind of problem in the future." He nodded slowly, appreciating the sincerity. "I'm open to explaining again," he said. "Not because I owe it, but because clarity is important." So he went through the story one more time, calmly and patiently. He showed them the details, the small things that made the misunderstanding happen, and how assumptions turned something small into something threatening. As he spoke, they listened, really listened this time. Their faces softened. Some looked embarrassed. Some looked thoughtful. "You should have asked." One of them said quietly, "I should have trusted you." Another said, he nodded, "I'm not angry anymore. But I hope this teaches all of us something." "It will," someone promised. "We'll handle things differently moving forward." There was a long silence. Not uncomfortable, just reflective. Then one of them asked a question he didn't expect. "How did you stay so calm yesterday?" The person asked softly. "We were shouting. You were alone. You could have panicked or argued, but you didn't." He took a deep breath before answering. "'Cause I knew the truth," he said simply. "And when you know the truth, you don't need to shout. You just need to wait for the right moment to share it." They exchanged glances again. His words hit them harder than anything else. Someone leaned forward slightly. "We're sorry for scaring you the way we did. The police threat was unnecessary." He nodded gently. "It was frightening, yes, but I'm not holding on to it anymore. I just want things to be peaceful." Finally, one person said what everyone else seemed to be thinking. "You handled yourself with dignity, more than we did." He didn't respond to that. He didn't need praise. He simply wanted normalcy. Before he left, another person approached him privately. "What happened yesterday showed us something important," the person said quietly. "Sometimes we forget how much harm assumptions can cause. You reminded us without being harsh. Thank you for that." He nodded with a small, sincere expression. "Thank you for listening today." When he finally walked out of the building, he felt a sense of closure. The sun was brighter now, the streets noisier, the world livelier. He felt like a chapter had ended, not in anger or resentment, but in understanding. As he walked home, he thought about everything that had happened over the past few days. He realized that the experience, as stressful as it was, had taught him something valuable. He learned that truth stays strong even when people doubt it. He learned that staying calm is not weakness, but strength. He learned that misunderstandings can be fixed when everyone is willing to listen, and he learned something about himself too. He had always thought he was just an ordinary person, someone who didn't like confrontation and preferred peaceful days. But this experience showed him that he could handle more than he ever expected. He could stand alone in a room full of anger and still stay true to himself. He could face fear and still speak with clarity. When he reached home, he placed the file on the table one last time. He didn't need it anymore. The papers that once felt like shields were now just reminders of a difficult moment that he had overcome. He poured himself a fresh cup of tea and sat by the window, the warm steam rising softly. Outside, the world moved on. Inside, he felt peace. He knew that life would bring new challenges, new misunderstandings, new moments of confusion. That's how life worked. But now he felt prepared. Not because he wanted trouble, but because he trusted himself more than before. He took a slow sip of tea and let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He had survived something heavy. He had seen the truth win. He had seen people change when given a chance, and that, more than anything, made him feel strong. The story didn't end with anger or revenge. It ended with understanding. It ended with honesty. It ended with calm. He looked out the window again, watching people go about their day, and he felt a quiet smile forming. He was ready for whatever came next. And he knew that no matter what happened, the truth would always be his greatest strength. This was the end of the trouble, but the beginning of a wiser, stronger version of himself, and that was enough.